Good afternoon, guys. How are you all doing? Welcome back to Historical Horses. Trying to get my positioning right here. I want the window for some light, but I don't want to be too close because of road noise. I'm trying to hide the background a little bit because my desk is a smidge messy. I managed to get a sort of little 10-15 minute slot between going and riding my horses where I thought, oh, I could just start filming this. So that's exactly what I'm doing right now, but I do look like an absolute scruff bag, as I say in every video, because I wasn't going to get out of my riding gear knowing that I'm about to go and ride, so excuse the attire, but you're used to it anyway. So last time we did about the horse-drawn human ambulances. This time we're doing about the equine ambulances, which were also horse-drawn. And I'm going to put a picture up on the screen now of a painting. This painting made me so emotional. I was really moved by it because I think it is obviously in World War One, and there is something about the heroicness of the horses in this. Oh, I mean, the horses were incredible in World War One. We know that, but there's something about the power and the the strength and the horses rescuing other horses. There's something about that that's just so moving, and thinking about the train that they were trying to save their fellow friends to get them back to safety, and the thought of the because to be picked up by the equine ambulance, the horse would have had to been fairly seriously injured, obviously not enough to be destroyed, but enough that they couldn't get it back. And as there's that thought of that, were the horses left on their own while soldiers went back to find help, or how did it work? But the thought of this incredible, powerful horse pulling the equine ambulance behind them across difficult terrain with, all sorts of noise and battle going on in the background, and yet they're saving this horse. It's like amazing and just emotional and the whole shebang. But anyway, I could waffle on about it for ages. We'll talk about it a bit later. So I couldn't actually find an exact date when we see equine horse-drawn ambulances really appear. I'm going to say from the research I have done, it would have been late 1800s, early 1900s, possibly a little bit earlier. Someone might have made something that they could put a horse onto, but really it was World War One where we saw the kind of equine ambulance really get used. And there was actually a clerk from Lingfield Racecourse who, I guess because he was always at the racecourse and he watched a lot of races and saw racehorses get injured, came up with his own equine ambulance, got it designed, patented, everything. And it was actually sort of his ambulance cart that really took off across lots of other race courses, and then he really started seeing them in towns and cities being used, and that was in 1907. He was called Robert Fowler, and he called it the Lingfield Humane Horse Ambulance. But we also know that sort of similar horse carts were called the knacker's cart, the float, the racehorse cart, the ambulance. They had a few names. I don't have a image of the Lingfield Humane ambulance, but this is the Royal Army Veterinary Corps one, and they are identical. They use the exact same type of ambulance. So obviously the knacker's cart, which was a very similar design, if not the same design, just given a slightly different name, would have obviously been used to pick up horses that had injuries in towns and cities and literally couldn't get back home. And I would have thought the majority of the time, if the horse was that broken, and we know the Victorians didn't look after their horses particularly well, and really worked them into the ground until they pretty much gave up, then the knacker man would come and pick them up in his car and take them to the slaughterhouse, the knacker's yard, which, it's not a great thought, is it? That poor horse, the years it's worked, and then its final trip in that cart, and it arriving at the knacker's yard, and there's probably a pretty hefty stench there, and oh gosh, it just doesn't bear thinking about, does it? Let's not think about it. And also read something awful about Victorian slaughterhouses and horse knacker yards, and oh god, it broke my heart. It was just, it will never leave me, what I read. I'll talk about it in a different video. So we see the Lingfield Humane Horse Ambulance Mark 1, which from what I gather was the sort of standard equine horse cart, but literally the horse had to go into it, and then to get off they had to reverse out. The Mark II, now they really thought about this. This was really impressive. They totally took on board that when a horse is severely injured, sometimes they can't reverse out, or they might collapse in the box, they might die in the box, and then it would be incredibly difficult to get them out. So the Mark II, the sides came away, the front came down, the back came down, and actually the floor went down. Pretty much the cart could be moved from around the horse, so if it did collapse, they could take it apart, and then the horse could be kind of, I don't know, helped moved off of the floor. But it was really clever. And they also had like a metal like half moon beam over the top, which was also used to help kind of winch horses in or help lift them. It was such an incredible bit of engineering, so well thought of, and like I say, it meant that horses that had been severely, wounded, injured, or broken down or whatever could be moved. I guess otherwise, if they couldn't have been moved, they'd have just been destroyed on the spot, and then some sort of big, more farmyard type cart would have come along, and they would have had to somehow manpower lifted them into the back of the cart. If we think about the horses that pulled these equine ambulances, they were so special. They had to be incredibly well trained, they had to be patient, they had to be incredibly strong. So we're thinking draft horses, shire horses, because they were pulling horses and a cart and a driver or a soldier in wartime, and also the unstableness of it, because as I've said earlier, a horse in the back of a cart is going to move around. If they're injured, they're going to be trying to take weight off of wherever they're injured. If they're scared, they might have been panicking a little bit in there. So I imagine there would have been some comfort in seeing a horse in front of you pulling you along. But I feel like the balance, you could never get it perfect because you've got a live animal in the back. So you would have had to have such a strong horse, a horse that would have happily stood still while another horse was being loaded, because it would have been quite scary for a horse to be loaded into this cart. So it might have taken some pushing to get them in. So the horse that had the equine ambulance attached to them would have needed to have stood like a rock. And they would have had to have been totally fearless. They wouldn't have been worried about anything that was going on with them. Very calm, very level-headed type of horse. So I mentioned the sort of different names for an equine ambulance, but when we think about who would have had one, I've already mentioned racecourses, the knackerman, charities. Charities actually had a lot of equine ambulances, as well as the army when it came to World War I. And it's in World War I that we really see the equine ambulances' incredible use, and how it meant that they could rescue injured horses, quite possibly from the front line, and get them back to a veterinary hospital. But it's also where we see charities come and play such a massive part in the amount of ambulances they managed to fund, which helped save some of these horses in war. Because the issue was that we needed so many horses in World War I, and sadly we were getting through them far too quickly, that the army started to realise that we need to look after them a little bit better, and we need to try and fix them so that they can go back into war. So suddenly these equine ambulances were really very important, because we needed to save more of these horses. And supposedly the sort of main reasons horses needed rescuing in war, obviously injury, wounds, but the other one was exhaustion, which again just makes me feel really sad that they were, they were just done. They couldn't even get up anymore. They were that exhausted, and that sort of, I don't think I've ever seen a horse truly exhausted. I hope I never do. But yeah, those were the two main reasons of needing to collect them and get them to a veterinary hospital. The RSPCA set up a sick and wounded horse fund, which raised an unbelievable amount of money of £250,000 back then, which is utterly remarkable. Now, when you think that war was going on and that people were still being that kind enough to support a charity and give their money, it makes it even more unbelievable, I think. And even King George made a donation to the charity. And that money meant that 180 horse-drawn ambulances could be used by the Army Veterinary Corps. and that was to move obviously injured horses and exhausted horses. They also paid for equine field hospitals and state-of-the-art operating theatres, and actually motorised horse ambulances. Another well-known equine charity is the Blue Cross, and they also had a massive impact in World War One and being able to support the Army Veterinary Corps and to be able to deliver many equine horse-drawn ambulances. The amount of money these charities raised was seriously unbelievable. Like, they must have worked incredibly hard to raise the sums they did, and that would have had a massive effect on the amount of horses that could be saved and helped in war. You know, without those ambulances, those horses would not have got back to the veterinary hospitals, and they wouldn't have had a chance of being patched up and having some sort of recovery. We have got help from the RSPCA, which, as I said, sent 180 equine horse-drawn ambulances. We had help from the Blue Cross, who sent many ambulances as well, and we also had like horse-drawn field ambulances, but for horses, by the Army Veterinary Corps as well. So, you know, there was a good supply, but you think for all those ambulances, they were all pulled by other horses, sometimes one, sometimes two. And the veterinary hospitals in war, a lot of the stuff they were supplied with was all donated by charities who had done all this incredible fundraising. And you might be thinking, well, by World War One, we did have motorised vehicles, and we did have a few motorised, like, horse boxes. I mean, sort of horse boxes. But the problem is, and I talked about this with these human horse-drawn ambulances, the terrain was so difficult in places in World War One that those motorised vehicles simply wouldn't have got across it. And so we had to rely on horsepower. And this is an incredible fact. Over 200,000 horses, donkeys and mules were rescued by a horse-drawn equine ambulance. That's an amazing number. I mean, if only it could have been more. As we know, the loss of horses, donkeys and mules in World War One was huge. It was millions. But to think that 200,000 horses were rescued, 200,000 times, brave horses, soldiers and drivers headed out to rescue horses that couldn't get back to the veterinary hospital. That's quite a figure. And I wanted to finish back on the painting that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, of just showing the amazing strength of these horses that rescued their fellow horses and got them back to safety and got them to veterinary care. It is remarkable when you think about it. I've even seen a clip, and I was really annoying because I can't find it again, where they actually managed to get 2 injured horses into one of those carts. And when you think of the weight that must have been there for the horses pulling them across the tricky terrain, I mean, the exhaustion for the horses pulling the equine ambulances must have been something, because the power to pull them, it blows my mind what horses can manage. And for the brave soldiers and drivers who got these horses back to safety in the middle of a battle, in the middle of war, when there was so much going on, trying to keep everybody alive. I mean, they are to be commended as well. Once again, horses saving the day, but there's something about horses saving other horses that makes it so special, I think. And I guess after World War One, we really start to see more of the motorised horse box charities have more of the motorised ones, and so the horse-drawn equine ambulance starts to sort of slowly not be used as much, because obviously they weren't particularly fast, being pulled by another horse, and you know, if you want to get to a veterinary hospital a bit quicker, then motorised is going to be your mode of transport, isn't it? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this rather short video, but I couldn't not touch on the equine ambulances and the heroic horses that pulled them, because I just thought it was such an incredible bit of history, and, you know, a really important part of World War One as well, because if those 200,000 horses and donkeys and mules hadn't been rescued, then they would have been just left out there either to die, or they would have been destroyed out there. So, you know, there were lots of lives saved by these equine ambulances. I will see you guys again very soon.